This is a tutorial on how to make I guess Bandlab effects. Basically the things that make your instruments sound not garbage. We're going to do the instrumental to the Final Takeover first. This is a song I've worked very hard on, and I'd still say it's not perfect, but I've refined the effects a lot. This instrument is the reverser piano, which is actually made with an effect, and we'll just jump right into that. Alright, first things first, it doesn't matter if you're using the phone version or the desktop version. However, I would recommend the phone version since it's a lot more reactive and a lot more polished. This is the effect I use for the reverser piano. Let's just go through it real quick. This is the EQ3M. This is one of the more simple effects. This is an equalizer that has 4 inputs, low, mid, high, and then a mid sweep. The low, mid, high is pretty self-explanatory. The mid sweep is a little more complicated. This is the frequency that is more pronounced within the equalizer. So I'd recommend using a frequency that resonates most with the instrument or the voice that you're using. If you're a baritone, for example, that would be more like 300 hertz. FBK compressor. Okay, so let's just summarize compressors real quick. What do compressors do? They compress the audio input. So first, let's go to attack. Attack is basically how long it takes for it to actually compress the audio input upon getting the input. Release is basically the same thing, but for when the input falls below the threshold. The threshold is the point where the compression will be applied. So basically how loud the input has to be before compression is applied. The ratio is a little less clear, but it's basically how hard the compression is. And gain is basically just a volume modifier in case the signal is too high or too low, which can lead to peaking. Moving on, we have the BL1176 compressor. Same logic. You'll actually find most of the same logic within most compressors and limiters. Speaking of which, here's a vintage limiter. Now, the difference between compressors and limiters are kind of hard to explain. Basically, a compressor will compress frequencies regardless of their volume, but more so when it reaches a peak. However, limiters actually limit the amount of gain that frequencies can reach entirely. This has a similar effect to compression, but it is different enough to where the distinction is important. Next up is a Multicab Pro. We'll actually get back to this later, since this is actually a distortion effect, which distorts and amplifies the signal, like a guitar. Now, multiband comp, this is a Bandlab membership exclusive thing. What this does is it has multiple ranges of signals that you can mess around with, and it compresses those ranges of frequencies independently. You can actually turn some of them off if you want to. Now, I neglected to mention this before, but the order that these effects are applied actually matter a lot. In Bandlab, these effects are applied left to right in order. How this works is that the first effect on the leftmost side takes the raw signal from the input audio. This could be a virtual instrument, voice, whatever, and modifies the audio to be however you tune the effect. Then, the next effect takes that modified audio input and modifies it further. This gets repeated throughout the entire chain of effects until the last effect on the rightmost side modifies and spits out a final output audio signal. This will be important later on as I actually make use of this. Now, since we're on the topic, let's actually mess with the audio. Listen closely for a difference. Did you catch that? The reason it's sort of hard to spot right away is because this effect is in the middle of the chain. The difference is so minuscule, but it matters so much. A casual listener won't know why, but they can tell. Here we have just a gain effect. You know what gain does by now. Let's take a listen to why I did this. A lot more difference with now because we're near the end of the chain. I also just want to take a moment to let you know that gain has other uses other than making the input louder or quieter. See, if you have a quiet input and then you raise that input up to normal using the gain effect, it basically compresses the lows and highs of an input volume-wise to be much closer to each other. To give you a relevant example, if you had a vocal input of you singing and you are whispering and yelling in this same audio, this kind of compression will make it so the whispers and the yells come out to be around the same volume. This is another way compressors compress audio using an input slider and an output slider, where for this instance, you take the input and make it very quiet and boost the output slider to essentially cancel out the input's quietness. A different effect happens when you do the opposite, making the input very loud, but then lowering the output so it comes out at a normal volume. However, this often leads to a more distorted effect akin to that of a broken speaker. But enough of talking about gain, let's move on to the star of this effect, the reverser. Let's take a quick listen to how this would sound without the reverser effect. And now with it on, it makes such a big difference that I think it changes the entire style. D-delay is kind of an ancient effect that I really don't want to get into, but it's basically a signal repeater. You have time at the top, which basically how much time it takes for it to repeat the signal. Feedback, how many times it feeds back the signal. High pass, low pass, I'm not even going to get into that. Dry level is the dry signal, in other words, the unmodified signal, and you can control how much of that gets outputted. The wet level is the same thing, but for that modified output from D-delay, you can control how much of that gets outputted. Most effects by now have replaced the wet and dry levels with just mix, basically a percentage slider that controls the mix between dry and wet, where 0% mix is 100% dry, 0% wet, and 100% mix is 0% dry, 100% wet. Now let's move on to spring reverb. This is basically, I don't even have to explain this reverb effect. It's as if the sound is traveling through a spring and then being outputted. Now there's the American or UK types. I usually use the UK type. I don't really know the difference. Now for everyone's favorite effect, studio reverb. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. I think the only thing that needs explaining is tone. The higher percentage is more brighter tone. Lower percentage is a darker tone. And stereo-wise, this is basically where you give the illusion that your instrument or audio is coming from multiple different angles or like all around you. There's not really much to explain in terms of help. Just mess with it and you'll find a solution. Now we're going to move on to my personal favorite instrument in this instrumental, the delay piano. Let's take a listen. Now let's just remove the effect. Ooh. It doesn't really sound good without the effect, huh? Let's explore why. What makes this effect sound good? First thing you'll notice right off the bat is I use a graphic EQ and a visual EQ. We'll get into why, but for the graphic EQ, this is basically an EQ3M, but with a lot more options. Now for a piano that isn't the only instrument in the song, you want to basically lower the lows and make the 6.0 kHz a little higher. This gives it a focus without it being too overwhelming. Now visual EQ is another Bandlab membership thing. I only boosted the second knob there because that's around the pitch frequencies that I'm using. Studio Tremolo is basically an auto pan, but also not really. It's kind of hard to explain, but just treat it like an auto pan. Tech Lag BA2A, this is the most basic compressor that you'll use all the time, at least I do. And gain is self-explanatory. Squeeze, I think squeeze is best explained by the input-output thing I explained earlier. Noise gate. Hey, is your instrument peaking? This will fix it. Now I'm going to go ahead and skip a few effects because we've already went over them. And now we're at filter echo. Filter echo plus, to be exact. This is basically D-delay, but a lot better in every way. You can customize it, and it's not complicated. The only thing I'd say would need some explaining is cutoff, where it would basically modulate the wet signal to be either exactly the same as your dry signal when it comes out, or you can lower it to be a little more muddy. I lowered it so that it's a little more muddy and quiet. And that gives a really good galloping effect in the chorus. All right, now we're done with the piano. Let's go over drums real quick. There's not really much to talk about here. Let's just give it a listen first. Then the raw audio. So you notice that there's a lot of studio reverb and also some visual EQs. Why there's 2 visual EQs? Well, you might need a lot more points occasionally, rather than just 3 points. So that's why there's 2. I'm not going to go into exactly how to equalize drums, but this is how I equalize them. You'll want to lower some of the higher frequencies so that it doesn't clash with with your voice and other instruments. And then you want to lower the low frequencies, at least some of them too, because that will clash with a bass instrument. And now that we're on the topic, let's move on to bass. Let's take a listen. You'll notice right away that there's no reverb. This is actually important because with reverb, it would sound very muddy. Now, this equalization is a little weird. Why would you boost the high frequencies? Well, you see, the low frequencies are already boosted in this instrument. This is what makes a bass. So I instead opted to give it a little more slap by boosting the higher frequencies. Here I specifically boosted the 80 and 320 frequencies because that would give it more slap. I reduced the 160 frequency because that would be just too much bass if it was there. Now moving on, we have the chorus ensemble effect. This basically makes it into an organ. I have this here because although it's not really that noticeable, because I have it such a low amount, it's still more flavor. Moving on from this, we have the Multi-Amp Pro. This is basically your deluxe amplifier from the guitar store. Notice that the drive is so low. That's why. You'll notice presence down there. That basically just boosts a higher frequency in the mix to where it makes whatever instrument more present. Multicap Pro is the same but with preset settings. And then we just have spring reverb again. If we combine this with the drums, we get a nice groove. Now, let's move on to our guitar, quote unquote. Looking into this, we can see it's actually a Leviathan synth, and it's using an edited big solo effect. This Leviathan instrument is actually a Bandlab membership exclusive. Now, what does that mean? It means you can actually tune this instrument a little bit. Not all the way, but it gives you some options. First, there's attack. This determines how long it takes for the instrument to reach its full volume. Release is how long it takes for it to release its full volume. Tone is how bright or muddy it sounds. For example, this is muddy. Then we're just going to bring that back to bright. And glide is how long it takes for it to hit the next note over. This allows it to simulate bends. Now over to the effect, we already know what studio tremolo is. Feedback killer is basically a signal muffler. The higher the amount is, the more feedback is muffled. Or in other words, the more the output is muffled. This is useful if there's a lot of distortion, unwanted distortion at that, and you need to clean up the signal a little bit. It's pretty good for that. Now on to noise gate. We actually already know what noise gate is. However, it doesn't really help much here. I'll disable it and then you don't notice anything. Same here with the digicomp. I don't really know why I keep these on, but I'm not really bothered. BL driver, pretty good distortion. You can adjust the tone so it's brighter or darker. I like keeping it here because it makes it sound like an electric guitar, sort of. Now this is where I made use of the effect order. The studio reverb is actually really important because this makes it so that it almost sounds like it's natural, like it's being picked rather than tapped. And now with the effect on, I guess a good way to describe it is the taps are softer. Now we have Multi-Amp Pro, which gives it the distortion, and then Multi-Cab Pro as well, and then another studio reverb to top it off. The reason the first studio reverb works like this is because the following distortion effects distorts the studio reverb so that it sounds distorted, I guess. And it sort of limits the reverb in that way. Now that we've gone through everything, let's just go through singing, I guess. This time I'll let you notice the effects. Got stereo-wise, visual EQ, de-esser. This basically limits one frequency to a threshold. Got an EQ3M. Got a compander. Same concept I talked about before with input and output compression. You got TechLab BA2A. And the last two effects are filter echo and studio reverb. Mental warfare, made up for your gain, made to be insane, paid for by containing my soul, who tried getting away from everything. I will fight to liberate myself. It's really amazing what such a world of difference that effects can make on your song. Another thing I'd like to note is that when you're layering vocals or any other instruments, you want to try to equalize them so that they're not clashing with each other. You don't want just the same equilibrium for every single voice in the song. Now, I would say it's okay if you have different people singing your song, but since I'm just myself in this song, and I'm layering multiple versions of my voice, I need to equalize them differently so that they don't compound with each other. In the end, it leads to a pretty good crowd effect. Now, because I've already spent a few hours on this tutorial, I think it's good to wrap up here. I've covered quite a few effects and my thought process behind it. If you need to rewatch, go ahead, or don't. I'm not going to hold it against you. I just made this for a friend, that's all. Anyways, hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.